Enjoy your meeting.
Say anything other than journalism.
Just a reminder, today's meeting is being recorded. Sorry.
That's worth reminding people. And that, as we're in class here, I mean, and a rule that you're always going to have anytime when you're near a microphone, assume that the entire world is listening. A number of people have gotten burned on that, but it takes a certain degree of discipline to realize that the entire world is listening and you're not talking to your buddies and saying dumb things that you'll regret that you've said. I've gotten tripped up plenty of times in my life on that. But anyways, going back, if you ask any group of journalists, would you stop doing what you're doing now for any other job, 95% are going to say no. But again, all that said, I think everybody will tell you the state of media today is an absolute mess. It is troubled. It has all kinds of things going wrong. And the key to that, to hearing that, is people have said that for certainly the last 50 years, the last 70 years. People are always decrying the media just are not what they should be, which is great. We should be doing that. But when your parents say, "Are you sure you want to go into media?" I hear about all the dying newspapers. The stuff that's on television isn't what it used to be, et cetera, et cetera. I heard the same thing when I was coming out of Notre Dame. Want to kind of give you a little bit of the history of how we got to where we are. The good old days, the golden days that people talk about that are now gone are actually days of scarcity, when there were very few people in media, where the people who did control the television stations, the newspapers, and the radio stations, and that was about all there was, basically had a license to make money. And it's worth kind of understanding broadcasting, and I'll talk in terms of broadcasting, but many of the same forces came into play in print. The original notion of broadcasting was that it was sent by television antennas or radio antennas across a limited frequency that carried those messages to people's radios and televisions. And those frequencies had limitations to them. They had to control them because the police needed those radios, firemen needed those radios. They were precious national categories that government assigned those stations, licensed people to use those stations, and it was a privilege, a government privilege, to be able to make money off of those frequencies. And as a result, radio and television was controlled by the government. And you had to apply to the government to get a license to have a television station. And once you got it, that was a license to make money. But you were required to certain terms of public service. And if you didn't perform those public services, you could lose your license. So to a large extent, news was there to be able to say, look at what public service we're performing. And heads of networks were brought before Congress to say, look at all the junk you're putting on television. You're getting rich off of feeding the American people junk. And they would say, but look at what we're doing in news. And we don't make any money off of news whatsoever. We're losing money on news, and that is our public service. And that was the role that news had for years and years and years. And people in news didn't have to worry about making money. The networks, the television stations, whatever, were making money hand over fist. And they were, to a degree, license insurance for those people. But even back then, when you didn't have to make any money, when you didn't have to adhere to any other standard than do you make your network look good, there was enormous unhappiness with the pressure from advertisers, with the pressures not getting enough airtime because they wanted to put sitcoms on or whatever. That back in that golden age that everybody misses, there was enormous dissatisfaction. So the clip that I want to show you is a speech by Edward R. Murrow, who was the most prominent broadcaster of his time. He was the most prominent broadcaster during World War II, and coming out of World War II was a major figure in broadcasting. This speech is from a movie that you may have heard of or seen called Good Night and Good Luck, and Murrow is played by David Stratham, and in the movie, he reads the speech that Murrow gave in 1958 to a convention of radio and television news directors. But this is the mood in 1958 back in the golden age of television.
Okay. I'm going to turn this down. I don't want to blow everybody's ears out here, so, okay. And we'll have to see a little advertisement here.
This might just do nobody any good. At the end of this discourse, a few people may accuse this reporter of fouling his own comfortable nest, and your organization may be accused of having given hospitality to heretical and even dangerous ideas. But the elaborate structure of networks, advertising agencies, and sponsors will not be shaken or altered. It is my desire, if not my duty, to try to talk to you journeymen with some candor about what is happening to radio and television. And if what I say is responsible, I alone am responsible for saying it. Our history will be what we make it. If there are any historians about 50 or 100 years from now, and there should be preserved the kinescopes of 1 week of all three networks, they will there find, recorded in black and white and in color, evidence of decadence, escapism, and insulation from the realities of the world in which we live. We are currently wealthy, fat, comfortable, and complacent. We have a built-in allergy to unpleasant or disturbing information. Our mass media reflect this. But unless we get up off our fat surpluses and recognize that television in the main is being used to distract, delude, amuse, and insulate, then television and those who finance it, those who look at it, and those who work at it may see a totally different picture. I began by saying that our history will be what we make it. If we go on as we are, then history will take its revenge and retribution will not limp in catching up. Just once in a while, let us exalt the importance of ideas and information. Let us dream to the extent of saying that on a given Sunday night, the time normally occupied by Ed Sullivan is given over to a clinical survey on the state of American education. And a week or two later, the time normally used by Steve Allen is devoted to a thoroughgoing study of American policy in the Middle East. Would the corporate image of their respective sponsors be damaged? Would the shareholders rise up in their wrath and complain? Would anything happen other than a few million people would have received a little illumination on subjects that may well determine the future of this country and therefore the future of the corporations? Those who say people wouldn't look, they wouldn't be interested, they're too complacent and insulated, I can only reply, there is, in one reporter's opinion, considerable evidence against that contention. But even if they are right, what have they got to lose? Because if they are right, and this instrument is good for nothing but to entertain, amuse, and insulate, then the tube is flickering now, and we will soon see that the whole struggle is lost. This instrument can teach. It can illuminate, and yes, it can even inspire. But it can do so only to the extent that humans are determined to use it towards those ends. Otherwise, it is merely wires and lights in a box. Good night, and good luck.
Okay, Tom.
So that's the state of the media in 1958. And I think people have always said,
Script, whatever remarks, moral and friendly may make.
Hang on. Okay, Tom.
can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. People always call me an optimist, that I always see the bright side of this, but I was brought up by the man who worked with Edward R. Murrow and always came in saying, there's just always going to be this fight, this kind of tension between the business side of broadcasting. In television, you are trying to do serious journalism in what is basically an entertainment medium, and that is just always going to happen, and you have to come to terms with that. And the same thing it happens in newspapers. The newspapers have to make money. But to move the story along, I see 3 ages in this. That's the age of broadcasting. Then there's the age of cable, and now we're in the age of internet. In the 80s, something changed radically. The Reagan administration said that we're going to deregulate broadcasting. And the whole notion of licensing, there are still licenses for television stations, but they never get taken away. They're never held responsible for anything. It has to be regulated because of the band space for television antennas. But there was absolutely no regulation that required any accountability on the part of television stations or radio stations for news components. That was the first time where radio stations just dropped their news department and said, we don't do news, which had always been a requirement. But the other huge breakthrough at that time was cable. And cable did not require the airwaves, and therefore was not subject to any regulation whatsoever. So, still there are certain decency rules for broadcasting under the theory that little children can turn on their local stations and see anything, and therefore there are limitations on what you can do on broadcast. But on cable, the assumption is that you have chosen to have cable, you have had a wire put into your house, and that you want that, and that you subscribe to certain stations. And so if Skinamax wants to do Max Late, they can put just about anything on television. And by the same standards, news changes. That the standard of news always was that it has to reach to all of American people, to reflect all the views of the American people, that it needs to be impartial, that it needs to be fair-minded. And with cable, there was no regulation, and that did not have to happen. So as a result, Roger Ailes had a fabulous idea. He said that television tends to appeal to try to get young urban people as their audience. And so out there must be an older, rural, and small town class of people who don't get their views reflected. He built Fox, and Fox serves that group of people incredibly well. It tells them that they are right. It tells them that their point of view is fine. It says you don't have to worry about the other point of view. And MSNBC followed that, seeing the success of Fox, did the same thing. That would have never been allowed in the age of broadcasting. And so all the classical standards for news went out the window. And so to a degree, I think it's important to make a separation between news and journalism. That news is all kinds of things, and we really need to talk about journalism. Journalism is a very rigid set of standards, a very specific ethic, and that is not followed by ESPN, which is primarily promotional, and is not, in many cases, not going to say anything bad about somebody, even if that's the case. It's not going to happen with Entertainment Tonight. It's not going to happen on MSNBC or Fox. And so that's rewritten the rules for where we are today. Then along comes the internet, which is, let me back up for 1 second. So the economic model for broadcasting was always advertising. And that was not nearly as important in cable because you had your cable feed. And you can have an HBO which has no advertising because you're paying a subscription fee. Again, that changed all of the dynamic of how media are financed. So now we move into the internet age, and no one has yet figured out where this is going to go, and that isn't your problem right now. I mean, clearly there's a supply and demand situation where the American people demand to know what's going on, want information, want celebrity information, want essential information, and there will be some way to supply that, and people will pay for it. People pay a lot of money for media. I've been working for NBC. NBC is owned by Comcast, which is pressing NBC, whatever you do, find ways to convert television into the internet, because they recognize that Comcast has no future as a cable company. Cable is going to be something, a passing phase, and that cable will switch over to the internet. And so Comcast is trying to redefine itself not as a cable company, but as an high-speed internet delivery company that will deliver you everything and anything that you need. In all of that, the central thing is what you are learning to do is to be content providers. I learned to be a content provider. What all of these new companies need is content. They have pipes, and they're empty pipes. And they're desperately looking to hire people who can give them substantive content. And as long as you're a content provider, the newspaper can go away, the television can go away. Let other people worry about the pipes, and you worry about, can I provide very good content? Can I write? Can I do video? The television is now converting to really not being television, but it's video and audio. And to a large extent, that's what this class is about. So that's my short history of where we're going, and I think it's a much better time than it was when we only had 3 networks, a few radio stations that you listen to, and 1 or 2 local newspapers. People have a much better source of information, much more variety, and all of this will sort itself out and is not your problem. So Len, why don't you take it from there?
Okay, I want you to stay with this because I think Tom's